Mr Tomlinson.
Thank you, Ms Morrison. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, which seems almost a daily occurrence this week with the Bill Committee that I'm also serving on. And I pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Lanark and Hamilton East. This is an important debate. It's a topic that regularly comes up, particularly here in Westminster Hall, and shows the importance of Westminster Hall. And we are very fortunate that we have a Minister who's very engaged, very proactive at listening, particularly where the system isn't quite working as it is intended to, and acting and working with experienced charities, policymakers and all the sort to bring together, because what we all want, regardless of which side of the House we're from, is to have a fair system that supports the most vulnerable in society. It's also a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Strangford, who, during my time as a Minister, really was very proactive, very constructive in this area, and I had many very good meetings with him to discuss specific issues, lessons that we could learn from Northern Ireland, and sharing best practice. In effect, there are two issues that have been raised, PIP and ESA. I would gently remind SNP members that they could take responsibility for, certainly for PIP. We, during my time as a Minister, had a very good relationship with my equivalent in the Scottish Assembly, and he was aware that it was ready as and when they were ready to take on that responsibility. 1.8 million people have already gone through the PIP process. It is considerably better than the old DLA system, and that is widely accepted by the vast majority of the charities who represent their members who've gone through the system. Under DLA, only 16% of claimants got the highest rate of the benefit. Under PIP, it is 23.5%. It is far better at identifying hidden impairments, fluctuating health conditions. For example, if we look at mental health conditions, and this has been highlighted in the two former speeches, under DLA, only 22% of those who had a mental health condition accessed the daily living component, yet under PIP it's 66%, and for the higher rate of mobility it was 9% under DLA and it's 24% under PIP. It is a far better, more streamlined system. The assessors are there to help people fill in the forms. The fundamental problem with DLA was it was in effect self-diagnosis. You would fill in a very, very long, very complicated form. A lot of people would do themselves an injustice and not actually highlight all of the issues that they faced, often because they took them for granted. You know, I can't sleep at night. It's just the way it is. And they didn't actually then highlight that in their forms. The forms were complicated, so they would not necessarily know the right bits to put down. And even worse, 70% of claimants on DLA had an indefinite award. Now, it's very attractive for MPs to say, well, we don't want anybody to ever go through an assessment. But the reality was, under DLA, 70% didn't. That sounds great. Yet 1 in 3 claimants' condition changes so significantly within 12 months, they should be on a different benefit. Now, the vast majority of people who go through the system have a deteriorating condition. So if their condition has changed, it's probably changed for the worse, and it is highly likely they would therefore go from the lower rate of benefit to the higher rate of benefit. And that was the single biggest difference to why it was only 16% under DLA got the highest rate, and it's 23.5% under PIP. We had people for 10, 20, longer years on a benefit below what they should have been entitled to, and they were unaware that they could have had an opportunity to go up. And it is right, therefore, that we look and assess people to make sure they are given the correct benefit that they should have. Now, common sense kicks in. If you are on the highest rate of benefit, you have a deteriorating condition, so unless there is some miracle cure, you are likely only to be reassessed at the end of the 10-year period, and then it would probably be very light touch. In effect, phoning up, has it been a miracle cure? No. Can you provide the GP's evidence to say it hasn't been a miracle? That's fine. You will go through. It is those who are on the cusp of going from the lower benefit to the higher benefit who can see having another assessment to check, and the system would actually program in to say this person nearly made to the highest rate of benefit. I suspect they will need it in 9 months' time, and the system will automatically trigger to remind them that there is a reassessment so they're not left languishing on those debts. So I urge members to be careful in trying to stop people having an opportunity to have an assessment. Now, in cash terms, DLA in 2010 delivered £12.7 billion worth of benefit support. The combined DLA and PIP is now at £16.6 billion. The time for assessment, when it was first launched, it was terrible. And we had lots and lots of debates in here. I wasn't the minister then, but I was warned when I first came into the role that we would have almost weekly debates, some people taking up to a year. That was unacceptable. But for now, nearly 18 months, it's been in a settled state, about 7 weeks for an assessment, 13 weeks end-to-end for the whole process, well below the initial target of about 16 weeks. And again, the charities and those with a huge amount of experience accept the system is working well. The forms have been streamlined. They are still longer than perhaps we would like, but it's always a balancing act that if you don't capture all of the information, people can then miss out on the benefit they will. And I repeat, the assessors are there to help the claimant. The government sets how much money and the points that are required, but the assessors are in effect there to make sure that the form is completed. And I've sat through assessments. I've seen two different extremes. I saw an assessment where it was a practicing nurse, and she came in and the assessment was super quick. They used lots of very long words that I had no understanding of, and they were able to breeze through there. The other end of the extreme was seeing an individual who English wasn't his first language. He had a mental health condition, was socially isolated, and in effect, if he had self-diagnosed under DLA, he wouldn't have qualified. But actually, the assessor spent 1 hour, 10 minutes, in effect, teasing out, piecing together the jigsaw to make sure that all of the challenges that he faced in his everyday life would be accurately reflected, and he would have ended up getting a higher benefit than he would under DLA. And for those who criticise the assessments, I urge you to go and view one. That can be arranged, and you will have your eyes opened up, because too many people claim their knowledge based on a film that is there to make commercial money rather than the real world. And it is frankly an insult to the huge amounts of hard work that a lot of these trained professionals are doing to help some of the most vulnerable people. And the facts are there comparing DLA to PIP. With pleasure.
I just wondered if you wanted to comment on, rather than the film, which again was based on individuals that represent the dramatic portrayal, but if you wanted to comment on the Dispatches programme as well, which wasn't a fictional portrayal, it was an actual portrayal of the assessment process that people go through. Yeah.
Yes, I'm not long. I'm glad the Honourable Member has intervened me, because I had a feeling she wouldn't let me intervene her later on, so I could now link that in nicely. Yes, the Dispatches programme showed an isolated incident. It was totally unacceptable. The individual was moved, rightly so, and that is why we have external inspectors going into there. Remember, this is 1.8 million people, and I would urge the Honourable Member to take up my invitation to go and view an assessment. Hearsay is not the right way to kind of hold governments to account. This is so important to people that people with positions of responsibility need to invest some time to go and see what actually is happening. It's not patronising, it's an important subject. There has been further improvements. The removal of the 28-day rule for terminally ill people. This was a cross-party campaign. It has made a huge difference to those who are terminally ill. It was a welcome measurement. There is ongoing training. I would like to see automatic recordings of all assessments, because I think that would be helpful on the appeals process. That needs a change in the contract, but my understanding is the intention is to do that. And also, it is right that the assessors now encourage people to bring somebody with them into the assessment, particularly helpful for people who aren't necessarily articulate, or English isn't their first language, or wouldn't have the confidence to display all of those challenges. I also think it's a fair point to say, and it was raised by the Honourable Member for Lanark, about the ESA and the PIP assessments are not a million miles too different, and too often I've heard of the cases where they've done one month, one the other month. There probably is some grounds, and I think in the Green Paper that is something that perhaps many organisations will lobby for, that there could at least be some serious data sharing going on there. And in conclusion, Ms Norris, because I have focused on PIP, just briefly on ESA, the Green Paper is a wonderful opportunity. As Scope, the charity, said, disabled people need expert, tailored employment support. We need to focus on what individuals can do and what they can't do, rather than what they can't do. It's important to provide tailored support, recognising people have fluctuating health conditions, utilising the best parts of the universal credit system that will allow for flexibility disability that will allow for some common sense, particularly where it's voluntary work, building confidence to get people back into work, providing that ongoing support when people go into work for the first time, and having that specific named coach. And I will continue to pitch as a matter of importance. The small employer pilot, I believe, is so successful that it should be rolled out across the rest of the country as quickly as possible, and we need to unleash the opportunity of disability apprentices. Everybody agrees it's a great thing. We've signed it off. We now just need to see that making a real difference, particularly for those with a learning disability.